You're listening to Driving It Home with Patti Vasquez on WCPT 820.
You know, it's comforting to have friends in studio. Elizabeth Laidlaw, fellow SAG-AFTRA member, actor, producer. You can find the podcast Derelict available wherever podcasts you might enjoy. We also have Ken Mejia Beal, who's in studio. He'll be guest hosting for me next Monday and Thursday and Friday. Monday and Friday. Elizabeth will be back next Thursday, guest co-hosting with me. On the line with me is somebody I had the pleasure of guest co-hosting a podcast on Topic for years. He now also is the co-host of. Are you still doing It's Complicated with Asha Rangappa? Renato Mariotti?
I am.
Excellent. I am. There's only so much information I could take in, and a conversation with you yesterday was great and informative, and made me feel really good about the future. Hey, Renato, how are you doing today?
Oh
no!
We lost Renato.
Hey, Renato.
I'm here.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yes. You're in a bad spot in your house. Tell Henry to go fix the Wi-Fi. Okay. How are you feeling, Renato, in the light of all the insight you've shared for years as a former federal prosecutor? For years, people were absolutely salivating and hopeful, or really dedicated to the idea that Donald Trump was definitely robbing us blind, breaking laws left and right. And they were like, surely the Russian investigation, all these elements would come together, and there was no way he would become president of the United States again. How are you feeling today?
Well, look, I'm not feeling good about the fact that, he is the president-elect. It's obviously devastating, and it's going to be devastating for all sorts of very vulnerable groups, right? Refugees, migrants, everyone in Ukraine, transgender Americans. There's a lot of groups that are going to be hit particularly hard. So it's obviously, I'd say, a dark time, for our country. I will say that for me, in terms of what is at the top of my mind, are many folks at the Justice Department who are now going to be put in a very difficult situation where they're essentially going to be asked to carry forward unlawful orders, or potentially, there's going to be retaliation against their former colleagues who have since left the department. And they ultimately have been told today by Mark Paoletta, who's heading up the DOJ transition for the president-elect, that, hey, you might as well just leave now if you're not going to be carrying forward our policies, including mass deportations and so forth.
And so Mark Paoletta, who it seems from news reports will be the next Attorney General for a long time. Well, and for folks who, and I have been trying to alert folks to this individual for years. He was instrumental in making sure that Clarence Thomas was on the bench. In all those photos you see of the travels that Clarence Thomas enjoyed with Harlan Crow, Mark Paoletta and his wife Tricia Paoletta were on all of those trips. He was the personal attorney for Ginny Thomas and her January 6th investigations and what her part was. And there's a lot of other things involved in that. But also, I think it's amazing to me, this guy was instrumental in withholding aid to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. Yeah. He was also the one who wrote the Ukraine memo, the quid pro quo, like when Trump talked to Zelensky, he was like, if you don't give us any dirt on Hunter Biden, we're not going to give you any aid in this. And so, he's been there orchestrating a lot of this. And to what Renato just said, he is now saying that basically they will unleash the DOJ on, and you and I talked last night. There are individuals that you are concerned for, and groups of people that you're concerned for. But one of the tweets that you put out there was like, look, this is going to be difficult. This is going to be hard. This is going to be painful for people, and the Constitution still exists. Tell us a little bit about, this is going to be challenging and expensive for a lot of folks, isn't it? But it's also, there at the core, we still have the Constitution, regardless of what his threat was to put it aside on day one.
Obviously for the groups of people I've already talked about, there are going to be consequences that the Constitution isn't going to address. Okay, there are going to be people who are going to lose their security clearances. There's going to be people who lose their government contracts. There's going to be people who have immigration consequences, and we've already seen the draconian way in which a Trump administration can behave towards migrants, right? But, what I was referring to there in particular is this idea of retaliation. I mean, Jack Smith, for example, is already in the crosshairs of Donald Trump. He's mentioned that he's going to be pursuing, criminal action against Jack Smith. You can think of all sorts of other people, whether it's Nancy Pelosi or George Conway or anybody that you could imagine that dare to stand up to Donald Trump, who could potentially end up on the wrong side of the criminal investigation. And I will just say, I have been talking to people who are themselves concerned about their safety because they've appeared on some lists or they have been a target of Trump, or he's tweeted attacking them, or whatever it might be. And they're trying to figure out, well, what does this mean for me and how concerned do I have to be? And I think, what I suspect is going to happen there, Patty, is Trump's Justice Department, Paoletta and so forth, will issue subpoenas and they'll launch investigations. And the idea is to impose costs on people. It's to intimidate people, and not just to intimidate them, but the idea is if they go after George Conway or Norm Eisen or whoever it might be, ultimately they are sending a message to everyone else that you might want to keep your head down and not criticize the administration because there is a cost. But, while, of course, when you send a subpoena out or launch an investigation, you have people hiring attorneys, and that's costly and that's frustrating. There's at the end of the day, in order to send George Conway off in chains, in my hypothetical example, or Jack Smith, you need to get 12 people in Manhattan to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a trial that's overseen by a judge with life tenure. And I do think that it really matters that we have a Constitution and we have safeguards in place, because ultimately our own fellow citizens may be able to be a bulwark against tyranny.
Mm-hmm. I spoke to a Cook County judge today who told me, because I can do that. It's just fun to say that. So who told me that one of the things, and I think Joe Esposito has talked about this too, which is that Dick Durbin and the Judicial Committee have been basically appointing judges at the federal level, and there aren't even any vacancies. Is that something that you've heard about, and hopefully was apparently behind the scenes move to make sure that we protect our Constitution and our rights?
Yeah, there's no question that that our senators have done, and particularly Senator Durbin, have done a great job of ensuring that our judicial vacancies are filled. We have one judicial vacancy right now at the trial court level that we do have a nominee who looks like she's already through committee and sailing through. That's April Perry. And then on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which oversees Illinois, we don't have any openings right now. And so that is, I'd say, a real success story. And it's the one part of the country where I think we've outpaced the Trump administration, which otherwise outpaced Biden in terms of judicial appointments. Yeah. But, ultimately at the end of the day, my concern is just obviously if, for example, the Justice Department is targeting Letitia James, that sort of thing, I definitely can have a significant impact.
Right. Oh. Well, yeah. She's a profile in courage, isn't she? Yeah. I mean it. I mean, she's she can't have. She has to have anticipated this might be, coming down the pike for her, and I think she stood up to him anyway.
Yeah. To turn it to something even just way grim is...
We're going to bring the notch down again. We got it. Keep it going, Renato. Keep it going.
Here's the thing is that the word was that Alito and Thomas were waiting for another Republican to be in the highest office, and so they could retire. And so people are talking about Aileen Cannon being on the Supreme Court, like young. I mean, let's do it this way. I mean, is there any hope? And believe me, I'm so proud that I have lived to see the first Latina on the Supreme Court. But do you agree with some folks who think that she should step aside in this, in this time period that we have before Trump becomes a president, in order for him to be able to appoint at least a younger Supreme Court justice?
I don't think that that's possible to have happen in this circumstance. And Joe Manchin's vote, I think, would be required. And as a practical matter, I don't think he's going to go along. So realistically, I don't see that happening. We have not had, the robust majority that we would have liked to have had in the United States Senate. I mean, it has consequences. Realistically, that's the downside of having a razor-thin margin is ultimately the likes of Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin have ultimately been the balance of power in the Senate, and it's meant that ultimately we haven't been able to push as much or get as much done as we would have liked.
All right. Do you have? I don't even know. Honestly, I don't even know because we've talked so much, and I'm not interested. Like we've done a little bit of. I'll go back and like the would have, could have, and that kind of stuff. And I know that as a lawyer, you're very much in the like what needs to be done now. Is that like where you're coming from as far as your approach?
Yeah, I mean, look, we can spend a lot of time pointing fingers. I think there's some value in that, and I'm happy to give you my thoughts on that as well. But I have been very focused on, as a practical matter, what the actual dangers are and what the hypothetical dangers are. I'm hearing, that my posts online were meant to sort of talk to the people who are worried about getting swept up in a black van and taken to some gulag. I don't think that is something that I would be concerned about right now. I think there are serious concerns. That's what I said. I don't want to. There are lots of people who are going to be hurt. Our climate's going to be hurt, and migrants are going to be hurt in Ukraine, and all sorts of many people are going to be harmed by the administration's actions. Transgender Americans and so forth are going to be harmed, but I do think that in the short run, what I'm concerned about is actually people being coward and not having the will to fight back and not having the will to stand for their rights. I think that's important, and I will say that if we're looking backwards and you want to look at a reckoning, to me, really the issue. A lot of people are focusing on how fast investigations were launched, initiated, and I do think there's some valid criticism there. But for me, really what I think is the bigger issue is that there really was not a reckoning at the end of the Trump presidency when President Biden was coming in saying, hey, there's a lot of really problematic, unconstitutional, illegal, norm-defying things that happened in this last administration. How can we make sure that doesn't happen again?
Yeah.
And what can we do to correct that going forward? That never occurred. And so now we're back in this zone where we're essentially hoping that norms and public pressure and all sorts of other things are going to be enough to save us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone follow Renato Mariotti for insight. And before we go, I mean, what are some of the things that you would, urge people when you say don't be afraid to speak out, don't be afraid to, resist and things like that? Do you have any, because we've been talking about joining community groups, finding your Democratic offices, finding your people and maybe in spaces that aren't comfortable. What are some of the things you would suggest folks do?
Well, I think particularly particularly for issues that you really care about. I think you need to find organizations that actually are fighting for those values. Whether it's the ACLU, whether it is, groups like the Illinois Environmental Council, whoever it is that is a group that's fighting for values that you believe in, I think it's really important to actually get out there and volunteer and contribute and be on the front lines so that you're doing something, not just posting on social media. And I think it's also important in your own communities to be outspoken, to be an advocate, and to be helping candidates to try to make sure, because we're in less than 2 years, we're going to be right back here trying to undo some of this mess in a midterm election. Ultimately, having a defeatist attitude or an attitude where, well, we just, we might as well move to Canada or something like that, that's surrendering our country and millions of people who can't move to a fate that they don't deserve.
Yeah.
Well said. Renato,
well said.
Great to talk to you. Let's do this more often.
Good talking to you, Renato.
Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate it. Follow Renato on Threads. You've moved to Threads and Blue Sky. Is that right?
That's right. Blue Sky and Threads. So please, follow me there.
Outstanding. Thank you, my friend. I look forward to seeing you soon.
You.
Take care.
Thank you.
And hugs
Bye-bye.
to your family. Thank you.